Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I'm one of your hosts here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast. And if you listen, you know that once a month, we get the pleasure of sitting down at the Cultural Capacity Podcast virtual table with fascinating voices from around the globe. And today is no different. So I'm excited to hop into this conversation today with the Dean Heffta. He is not only an author, he is many, many things, which I learned about actually this summer. That's the first time we've crossed paths. I like to give listeners and viewers, Dean, I like to give them a little context as to how I have connected with the guests. Some have just been virtual internet friends over time, and then others have been people I've known for decades. So Dean and I go way back to this past July. But I'm excited for you all to learn from his story. As with any guest that we have here, we see this as an opportunity to not only learn from story and the power of it, but also just to open up our minds and our perspective to other ways of life, other ways of thinking, other ways of being, and all of those components that make our own personal cultures uniquely what they are, and that cultural origin story, which we all have. So before we jump in with some official intros from Dean, who is the founder of Claris Results, do you consider yourself a consulting firm? Is that fair to categorize you that way, or how should I categorize your company, Dean?
Yeah, I'd say the core of my business would be training.
Okay.
But I do consulting and speaking and all the things that revolve around helping leaders and organizations get better.
Okay, cool. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about that, and we're going to learn more about his journey too. But as you all know, on the Featured Voices, I do always like to start by giving guests their flowers. And Dean is no different. Regardless of how short or long I've known someone, I am definitely, if anything, I'm an observer of people. So one of the things that I wanted to share with viewers about you, Dean, is that when we crossed paths this summer, I think Dean has this very heartfelt ability to not only authentically connect and meet people where they are, but to also be very comfortable in your own skin. And I got to learn, actually, he was co-facilitating an intensive 2-day training I got to go to while I was in France this summer. It was an incredible opportunity to learn from you and the other author of your book, and in our global community that we're both part of with Kaler Communications. Shout out to Dr. Tavy Kaler, and the team for Process Communication Model. But I'm getting lengthy here. But one of the things I learned very quickly about Dean is, though he might seem a little quiet and very observational at first when you meet him, he's incredibly vulnerable as a leader. And we got to know a lot about you through those 2 days of training, just by you opening up and sharing little bits about your family, your relationships, your story. And I wanted to give you kudos for that, because it is not often that you go to a training where I didn't know anybody else in that room. And by the end of a second day, you're all like hugging each other and saying, "We'll see you soon." So I attribute a lot of that environment to your facilitation skills. And I just wanted to give you some flowers before we hop in. But without further ado, I'm going to have him introduce himself how he likes and tell us what he wants us to know to kind of start out and get to know him. But this is Dean Heffta. He's an author, he's a father, he's a husband, he's a speaker, he's a trainer, he's a coach, and so many other things. But at the end of the day, he's a human, just like you and me. So here is Dean. Dean, go ahead and introduce yourself to guests who may not be familiar with you or your work.
Well, thank you, Justine. And thank you for the flowers. It's so kind. And I'm going to take a moment and put them in water to make sure that they don't wilt on me, because I want to
Please.
see them, and remember them. And that's very kind. So who am I? I mean, essentially, the work that I do is aimed in my business at helping leaders or people that find themselves in situations of leadership to be more effective. And that's at the essence of it. And when I think about leadership, it's related directly in my mind to influence. It's hard to be a leader without being influential. And if we're going to be influential, it requires effective communication.
Mm.
And so the work that I do really orbits around those worlds of being an effective leader through more effective communication. And that's why, our experience together around process communication model, it's really important tool that I bring to my clients from a perspective. But even if I'm not directly training on that as a topic, it really informs how I think about our relationships, our connections, our communication, and probably first and foremost, ourself and
Mhm.
that self-management and self-awareness. And if we're going to lead and if we're going to have a positive impact on our culture and in our environment, it begins with the relationship we have with ourselves. And that's been a journey for me. So it's interesting your observation of my vulnerability. That is not what somebody would have said 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's been, you know, part of my own journey of recognizing the utility, the value, the impact of being able to be more open, not because I wanted to hide anything, but really before I just didn't think that it was that useful to share more about myself.
Would you
So
would you consider yourself an introvert? That might be a loaded question, but I'm asking because I think you hit on something important for listeners. And I try to always break apart because we have so many unique perspectives on the Featured Voices episodes. So could you go a little further with that
mhm.
evolution part? Because I think sometimes my story is actually similar, Dean. And I know some people might not believe that because they're like, oh, you're so outgoing and friendly. And I'm like, I'm actually like an extroverted introvert. I've had to work really hard and still I work to, like you're saying, that's a lifelong thing of feeling comfortable in one's own being, in one's own skin. So what helped you get there? Because obviously we both work with a lot of different leaders across different sectors. And I see the same thing where people say, well, it's not that easy to be vulnerable. It's not that easy
Mm,
to share certain parts of who I am. And they say exactly what you said, which is, it's not that I'm hiding things. I'm not this like CIA person out here with a double life or like, could you explain that more for people, especially for those of us, even if we're just perceived this way, but also for those who are extroverted, who go,
mm.
Dean, like if they don't understand that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I really love that question because I want to hit on a couple things. The concept of introvert, extrovert, and some of my journey, maybe of more vulnerability. The introvert extrovert is interesting because I think the most common thing that I hear from people is when maybe our tendency as people is to oversimplify, to reduce people to boxes or categories or simple ways of our these binary thinking of, are you this or are you that, are you introverted or are you extroverted? And I would say most people, maybe 90% of people, would respond to that with, well, it depends. It
Mm.
depends on the situation, it depends on the people, it depends on the environment, it depends on my energy, it depends on many things. And that's one of the things that I have appreciated about the model of a process communication model is the recognition that we have all of these different energies inside of us that we use in different moments. And if you put me on a scale, I would tip towards the introverted side, but I have many people around me that would refer to me as someone who is so outgoing and so extroverted. And I believe there's a much deeper and more nuanced definition of thinking about introversion versus extroversion.
Mhm.
I'm most comfortable one-on-one. And so if you look at me in a large group gathering, maybe it's a social gathering, people will observe me going to these things, often because of business or things like that. I'm eager to go to them. I'm fine going to them. But what you'll observe is when I'm at those large events, maybe there's 300 people, I'm having a series of one-on-one conversations,
Yeah.
which is different than people that go to those that end up holding court with maybe 6 or 8 people and everybody's gathered around and experiencing the energy and laughing. And right, that's not how I tend to do it. I tend to have these one-on-one conversations. And so that's maybe my dynamic of introvert, extrovert. It's situational, and we're all nuanced like that in my experience. My journey to being more maybe vulnerable or transparent probably started at the beginning of my career. I started unintentionally in the world of sales. That was not my objective, but I needed a job.
Right.
And as many of us
As
have
many of
needs
us
to.
find ourselves doing over the years.
That's right. And one of the trainers that was formative for me early in my career uh, encouraged me to share more of my story. And my response was like, I don't feel like I need to talk about myself. And his challenge was, it's not about you, it's about them.
Mm,
And so if we think about that vulnerability and openness, not as self-serving or like I'm trying to do, therapy in this moment. This is not about doing therapy with others by sharing our trials and tribulations or trying to get the spotlight on ourselves or, poor me or woe is me or victim, mentality. It's none of that. It's simply sharing for others so they understand our journey and how do we build rapport? We find points of commonality.
it's a
we
way to
we see
connect.
the humility of people's
Yeah.
mistakes and fears and all of those things, and so this humanness begins to emerge, and we find more of those points of contact so we can build that rapport.
Yeah.
And you observe that I tend to be observant at the beginning, right? So I'm trying to understand the situation and see what's going on here and have good timing maybe to add my contribution and give space for others, which that tendency has put me into situations where people invite me to be a facilitator. So many situations with leadership teams, I'll be brought in to facilitate the conversation because I'm focused on the process
Same. Yeah.
more so than the content. And it's about, if you're going to facilitate, you have to be good at self-management. You have to be in the moment, but not among the dynamics. And so thinking about it as an act of service, being vulnerable to help others, to inspire and help and encourage others, and ultimately find points of contact for building a relationship.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about how Dean ended up here as founder of Claris Results. So you mentioned taking a job early on. However, because I know a little bit of your story, I want to tap into this just because, again, we have viewers and listeners from all over. And it's one of my favorite parts of this whole podcast is to just ask people to share some things from their cultural origin story and to break that down. Again, if this is your first time watching or listening to this podcast, culture, whether it's our own personal culture origin stories, whether you're examining an organization's culture, we have 5 key components and key elements that we're always looking at and that might show up differently. Those are norms, beliefs, values, language, and symbols. And those can all look a multitude of ways. Especially that language one. And I know Dean and I are both big on that, being part of the process communication model global community. But language is not just only hablo en español y también en inglés. It's not, I speak in Spanish and also in English. It's exactly what Dean was just referencing, which was, can I get on some form of the same wavelength as this person that I'm having a connection with? And what are those connecting points for both of us that we have in common? I think about that often because in Spanish, the word for community, right, comunidad, is from the word común, common. All of that stems back to the Latin roots of what you have in common. We can't build community by just trying to grab something and go, well, Dean wears glasses and I used to wear glasses. Boom, glasses crew. Right. I mean, you can, but will there be meaning? Will there be depth? So tell us a little bit, and I'll kind of guide a little bit only because I'm curious for how you'll share it too. But you have now worked with some incredible organizations. You've co-authored a book, maybe even more. Tell me if I'm missing anything. I don't know your entire biography, but you've done such incredible things. And you also began your childhood days with farm life.
Yeah.
And this is
So
near and dear to me too, right? I'm a Midwest gal, and global listeners, that means we're in middle America.
we're in corn
The
country.
middle of America. And I did grow up around some farming and stuff too. So this fascinated me because, again, how we met was at a global conference in France, and we found out we actually live like 2-3 hours apart from each other. So
That's right.
small world.
It is. It certainly is. Yeah. So my story, as you said, I grew up on a farm, family farm, multi-generational family farm, youngest of six by a long ways. So my nearest sibling is 12 years older than I am. So essentially, I grew up as an only child with much older siblings. And growing up on the farm in actually North Dakota, so very, very rural. That's the formative experience. You learn responsibility very early. You're entrusted with things very early. I think I started driving a vehicle when I was, for the first time, maybe 8 years old or something like that. And you have lots of time to think and reflect and experience nature and the world and all of those kinds of things. But also at the same time, when I think about, where you end up on your journey and some of those formative experiences early on, as a, I would say as a family and as a business, we weren't great communicators, from a family standpoint. And so I observed that being young and seeing all these interactions, that there's a lot of opportunity for communicating better. And I think that kind of seeped into me at a kind of unconscious level. And eventually, over the course of time, it's always this interest and this curiosity that's informing some of the things that I'm doing that was running in the background, right? So, kind of what's the software running behind us. And so, through my journey, whether it was in sales, whether it was moving into more executive leadership, more training and development, all of those things, that was this kind of commonality that eventually 5 years ago, I just said, I I feel compelled to go and create something of my own, to go out to be in service of others, and I believe that people will want to pay me for whatever I can bring to them to help them. And here I am still today.
If you build it, they will come.
If you build it, they'll come, right? If you
Um,
find their problem, they will pay you.
right, right. So talk to us then a little bit about your book. I'm actually going to pull up a picture of it. So
Mhm.
do you tell us a little bit about your text and your opportunity in co-authorship? Had you written any books before, or had any publications before you and Michael's book came out?
That was the first. That was our first. Both of our first books and our first book together. A little bit of origin on that. So Michael Dufresnel, the co-author, my co-author, who lives in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
he was my certifying trainer in process communication model,
Mm-hmm.
and we met each other for the first time in Atlanta several years ago. And at the end of training, we were actually giving him a ride to the airport, and he said, in passing, he said, we should write a book together. And
Interesting.
I said, okay. And I kind of threw the comment away a little bit because I thought, I don't know what to do with that. And then I followed up with him and asked him to basically convince me why I should be his co-author. And we talked about some of the reasons behind that and some of the things that he saw. And that began our maybe too long of a journey in writing this through Zoom and apart from each other. But really the objective, our goal with how we connect the book was twofold. For people that are not in the process communication model community or have not been trained or exposed to it, we wanted to write it in a simple enough way that the principles of PCM could be introduced through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But the primary approach is really for people that have maybe taken the assessment, they've been exposed to it, they have their own report, maybe they've gone through some discovery training, some introductory training, or maybe they are a trainer themselves. And so we created it as really a reference resource. We put together the first comprehensive glossary of terms for process communication model, so that people can go back to, what is this word that we're using in a very specific way in PCM? What does it mean? How do we have a shared definition? And there can be lots of confusion that comes when you use certain words. And so we want to make sure that there's a shared understanding. And so that was one of our objectives. And then just being able to have a accessible reference guide for people to come back to and to keep our minds fresh on the basics of PCM. That was our goal.
Yeah.
And it's been a fun experience and a learning journey along the way.
So here's where you can find Michael and Dean's book. I need to give y'all a rating. I'm gonna do 5 stars, just saying. But here's where you all can pick up the book on Amazon. I know that, as with most books, you can probably find it other places too, but Amazon, you will get it very quickly, depending on where you're located. You can even see a sample of the text here, like many other books you find on Amazon. But here are the co-authors right here. This is the Michael that Dean is speaking of. What's up, Michael? We gotta give what's up, though. I will say I had virtual coffee last week with one Monica and Magda. They were
awesome.
So we got to let people know, as they're watching and listening to us, Dean, what in the world are these two talking about PCM in like very like Cliff's Notes layman's terms? Partly because one of the things that Dean and I have in common is wanting to share this incredible tool with the world and helping it become accessible, which is the heart behind why I know a lot of the reason why you wrote this book. And I have found it, even being a newer certified trainer from the past few years, I have found it to be an incredibly helpful tool. So I want to tell you that, number one, I need to write you a review. Please hold me to it. And third, I will also say our most listened to episode here on this podcast is the one that says, what is the process communication model? So I know that people are interested in communicating better. I also know from my years of work in consulting, about the same number as you have. That's the thing. It's the thing, no matter what type of survey you're giving. If you're conducting empathy interviews, group trainings, group coaching, whatever the facilitations are, it will almost always come back to communication. Our communication isn't good. It's not there. Or there's something wrong with communication.
Can I say something right there? Can I jump in,
Should.
Justine, real quick?
Please.
Before it escapes me, because you bring up such an important point. And it is think about the definitions. And so often people are using terms like, we're having communication problems. I've communicated over and over and people still don't get it, right? So we use that word communication. Let's take a moment and go back to, at least in PCM, how we look at what is communication. It's the meaningful exchange of understanding between two individuals. And for that to work, it's about being in a positive state, right? So this, what we call plus, this state of, understanding and peace and acceptance, where it's like, I can hear you, I can accept me. We have to have a meaningful exchange of understanding for there to be communication. And most of what we encounter in our world is simply what I call the distribution of information. We're sending emails, we're talking, it's all going out. And without that offer and acceptance, you don't really have communication. And so having those moments of ensuring we're building that understanding, that's the rare, what I would call the rare special moments where we're actually communicating.
I've also seen, I love the way that you've broken this down, because one of the hardest concepts in the training process for me when in becoming a trainer with PCM was understanding, like, Justine, it doesn't matter how nice you think you're saying something. if the person on the other side, so like if Dean and I are having this conversation, but he's actually somewhere else up here because of something that happened before we hopped on this Zoom call. It's going to be unlikely that he's going to remember really anything that we've discussed. And when we make those assumptions, that's a key. I do want to pull a little bit on, Dean, just because you are so expert in your facilitation of these things. But when I'll give a common example I get, just like what you said. Well, we sent emails, we put it in the newsletter. What do you mean? Well, what else am I supposed to do? I'm beginning to think that people just, I don't know. I think it depends on if people value the people in front of them enough to want to go a little deeper and actually understand, like, oh, well, what forms of communication do you prefer? I don't know. What do you think is happening in workplace culture right now with this? Like in this moment, because to your point, it can be also frustrating. Let's offer this other perspective, right? I'm playing devil's advocate at the same time while I'm picking it apart. You also have executives. I think of one of my corporate clients. It's a chain of grocery stores, and they have about 30 different locations in the Midwest. If I'm an executive sending out emails and reminders, to be fair, let's do a case study, Dean. To be fair, I'm worried about my bottom line at 30 different locations. Am I worried about one of 3,000 some employees if they're actually checking something in a newsletter for career opportunities or something? I don't know. And I'm not saying there's even a right or wrong to this type of scenario. This is what I'm hearing more and more, especially when we get into intergenerational. And you're a Gen Xer, I'm a millennial. These are also some of the things I see butting their heads in the workplace right now in cross-cultural communications, intergenerational communication, where people are looking for others to just step up. And then you have the people who are supposed to be receiving the intended messages, like you're saying, going, but they don't really care about me. They don't care to get to know me. So what do you think is really happening with workplace culture? This is like a loaded cultural question. But because we now have 5 generations in the workplace, this is what I'm actually seeing cause. And I'm a person who, my company has done a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion work over the years and cultural change management. But people are still kind of missing the boat, even aside from whether it's DEI efforts, whether you're focused on bringing generations together. There's something still missing. There's something still being missed. So to your point, if people are in constant distress these days from war, violence, and they're coming to the workplace carrying these distressing things, how do we get to a place where it's healthy? Dean's like, well, Justine.
we might need to schedule another
five more interviews.
Like this is like such a big thing, right? And so I know I'm like my disclosure is I know that we won't be able to do it justice today, but
let's talking a really big pontificate.
Yeah, well, I love it. I love it. I'm just so excited by the question, the topic, and it's so much about where I spend my time that we have to be able to recognize that it's easy for us to attribute our frustrations to the individuals. Why didn't my boss do this, or why did my employee do that? What's wrong with them, right? So we have this fundamental attribution problem that we have to deal with, when in reality we've got some macro things that are demanding things of us, that we're then experiencing these micro frustrations. So you think about this, right? What have we done in the last 30 years? Well, we've essentially gutted middle management in most organizations. The push has been to flatten the organization, reduce cost, increase efficiency. Well, what has that led to? We've got managers that have 24 direct reports. Well, I can assure you that you are not going to be able to develop, coach, or connect with 24 direct reports. You can't do what needs to get done. And on top of that, they spend half their time as a working manager doing things that must be done by, it's like
keep the company running.
Yeah. And so with those types of constraints, what am I going to resort to in my communication? I'm going to resort to the easiest, fastest way to get information out.
Yep.
I'm going to send an email out.
Yep.
And so we've taken away the ability to be able to have communication. And what's interesting, when we think about this belief that we've created all this productivity, worker productivity has really not made great gains.
No. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, that's
And so what we've done is we've really replaced some of these what seemed like maybe inefficiencies, how we got work done with these in-person meetings, with the time that we took to do these specific things. And we've said, let's spread that out. And, I've got corporate clients, they're getting 200-300 emails a day.
yeah.
If you wanted, you could spend your entire day simply sorting and responding to emails and do zero when it comes to being productive towards what you've been entrusted to be productive toward, the problems that you're hired to solve.
Yep.
And the demands on any organization, I don't care if it's a nonprofit, if it's a hospital, if it's a manufacturing company, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Everybody's being pulled in all of these different directions. And then the strain that we name is the interpersonal relationship, the frustration we have with a person, because it's the most obvious. And so we can attribute our problem with the person.
Yeah, that's good.
When it's many other things that are putting us into this situation. And it's hard for us to say no, right? Because of the game we're playing, the system we're in, or because we are sincerely, I look at it like this: who tends to get promoted into positions of management? Well, what are the traits they tend to demonstrate? They're hardworking, reliable, good problem solvers, work well with others, helpful. Okay, so we give them more responsibility. What is their unconscious belief they need to do more of? They need to do more of all of those things that got them that promotion.
Doing. Yeah.
So I'm going to work harder. I'm going to
Yeah.
make better decisions. I'm going to solve more problems. I'm going to be more helpful. And so
Right.
this unbelief underneath the surface is I just have to give more of me. And I'm working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. How much more can I give?
Yep.
And then we wonder why there's miscommunication, frustration, burnout, turnover, lack of productivity.
Yeah, I would say to your points too. I think the underlying root cause, whenever I hear that as the finger point, so to speak, of it, to me, a lot of it does go back to self-awareness and self-accountability as well. I think that it's really hard for us as humans to really be honest with ourselves sometimes. And that's what's required to actually evolve in our ways of thinking, in our ways of communicating, to even get to a place where we go, oh, okay, I could have handled that differently. I could have responded better, or I could have managed my own distress in that situation a little differently. um, that's why for me, finding out the tools of process communication model and all of the long time research that's been associated with it as well. Not only was it a game changer for how I think about my clients in business, it was number one, a game changer for myself. Because believe me, I don't invest in things that I don't believe in. And for me, there was just so many aha moments for how I had been mismanaging exactly what you named. And that had been a lot of my story over the years of being promoted and doing and achieving. But then you're putting extra pressure. And I found this to be true because in a lot of situations, I'm like 20 years younger than the people I'm evaluating. So then on top of it, you're also kind of navigating some identity stuff of, am I enough? Am I worthy for this role? Like all those things that you already battle. And I don't think until we create time and space and we value in the workplace what it's required for people to continue to develop, regardless of their title, I think, yeah, to your point, it's still going to be this untapped thing that we gloss over when there's actually so much nuance underneath of it.
If I can add just one thing to that, before we move on, every organization has the interaction between the individual and the system.
Yeah.
And the challenge that we run into is often our problem is emerging from our system. But when we are in distress, or when our people inside the system are in distress, we can't think clearly. We can't see the real issue. We can't solve the underlying issue of the system. And so we attribute it with this, this limbic hijack where it's got to be this person, and we move into this fight and flight and all those things. And what happens then is, and by the way, I mean, the world and the media, they want us pissed off, they want us angry, they want us distracted. And
The
so we have to
distraction.
have this discipline to be able to self-manage. And as leaders in any organization, the only way that we can deal with the system is if we are managing ourselves personally well enough so that we can see what's going on here and begin asking ourselves and the people around us healthier and better questions. I had a client a few years ago. They were introduced to me, and the person that was making the introduction said they need communication training. They're a family-owned business, 5 years old. They've had a lot of growth, 80 employees, a lot of distress. They need communication training. And my response was, maybe. Let's see. So my job as a consultant, as a trainer, is to basically try to talk people out of what they think they need.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I mean,
right. So they come and say, here's what our problem is. I said, let's sit down, let's talk about it. We spent 30 minutes. And at the end of it, I said, you don't need communication training yet. And they looked at me like I had a foot growing out of my head. And they said, we got all this distress, we got all these problems. It's got to be communication. I said, well, it is communication, but the challenge isn't increasing the knowledge of the people in the system. You have 80 people, you have 5 different departments, you have all of this growth, all of these things happening. And they said, you don't have one documented process. Nobody in your business can explain how your business creates value or delivers anything to your customer. So the first thing you have to get in place is, how do we deliver to our customer? How do we work together? And so that's where we went. We spent a day with all of their leaders of all of their departments, mapping out, how do we do business?
That's what, real talk, that's what a lot of even my assessment tools for my company over the years, they end up landing on that exact phenomena, because places reach out. Oh, we've got problems with culture. Oh. But it's the same exact findings, like what you're saying. No matter if the thing is culture or communication, those are the 2 big ones, because that is what my company does too, similar to yours. That is what it always goes back to, is typically then, as I'm conducting our empathy interview process or using an assessment tool we have, what will come out is that people just don't even know. They don't know what they don't know, because then, like, upper management might tell me in a meeting and they'll go, oh yeah, we've got very direct processes for how we handle this. We've got policies. And then when I go conduct empathy interviews, which again, you're telling upper level senior management, I hope you don't need me. I hope that all the assessments come back when I put together the reports, all this stuff. It's like, boom, y'all rock. Awesome. Like, I hope that you don't need me. But usually it always lands on that. When it's named as culture or communication, it's really a breakdown of how those things are made available and how we choose to actually, I'm going to use a K-12 term because it's my background and I'm a teacher at heart. It's how we check for understanding. That's what's called in education terms, but that's what I see many leaders, specifically in corporate too. They're not trained. Many of us aren't trained to innately just know how to do those things. And
well,
many
we had a meeting 6 months ago, and we
decided
that we were going to.
Well, I sent an email 6 months ago, and you responded yes on it, instead of just doing the diligence, right? Like, in my trainer in PCM, he was amazing at this, and I now use it in email all the time, because you're sending, like you named earlier, you're sending an invitation. But now I learned very well from Dr. Michael Gilbert, and he'd always put it. And at first, when I was first being trained, I'm like, well, this is a little overkill. I'm totally like bought into it, because I'm like, this makes so much sense. So he would usually end almost every email, because it's an ongoing conversation with, will you let me know if you have questions? But it also was strangely so warm and inviting, because I wasn't typically being communicated with that way. Like, oh,
You're just getting dumped on.
He knows my channel. He knows. So anyways, do you have anything else to add, I guess, before we go on? I'm kind of belaboring it, but it is interesting how as humans, we just always jump to the macro and we
Mhm.
haven't considered, oh, maybe I just need to print this off and display it more places.
Here's
Like that.
yeah, here's how I'd land this part of it. And that is I had another situation with a coaching client, global corporation that he was a part of a leadership group recently put to, and he was in South America, and the rest of the leadership team was in Europe, mostly in France, and he was having frustration because he wasn't able to get things done that he was wanting and hoping and opportunities that he saw. And the story he told himself was that it was a cultural thing, that those Europeans have it out for me because I'm South American, right? And then once we go through the PCM,
Historically, wait, let me just say this really quick. Historically, we know, and I say this as a person who holds both indigenous and colonizer bloods from Latino America, like that is warranted in some ways. And also, it's also a bias that he's holding, right? Sorry,
right.
just want to point that out for language to our listeners. Okay, sorry.
And so being aware of those stories, what he realized when we got into the PCM side of it, and he understood the structure of most of his peers in Europe compared to his perceptions, channels, structures, psychological needs, radically different.
Yeah.
And he quickly realized, oh, the issue has not been the culture.
Yep.
It has been our perceptions based
Yep.
on our personality.
That's right.
And so he was able to change the story and change his approach to meet them where they're at, to get them what
Right.
they need and
Yep.
have more success.
Yep.
And so, like, I'll sum it up with saying, let's be very quick and eager to separate the problem we're experiencing from the person that's in front of us.
Mm.
Let's make sure that we are recognizing that there are many factors. Let's be curious and ask ourselves questions like, how do I know? And how might we go about solving this? And what's the real issue here? Because typically we're experiencing the presenting problem rather than the real problem.
Mm. 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 Dean didn't come to play today, you all. He came to drop some wisdom. But I like that. And so often, we just at humanity in general, we're doing that. We're crucifying people that we don't even know anything about. Like, let's be honest, how, and if we just pause to ask the questions like you named, well, how do I know this is true? What do I really know about this whole situation?
And to remember that other person likely did not get up that morning with the express goal of making my day miserable. I'm not that important in most people's lives, right? Oh, everybody is just trying to do the best they can.
Yeah, like take it down a notch. This person, even though, right, we all have been there where you replay a conversation that for you was maybe difficult, you like me or you, right, as a person. But if you really step back and get on the balcony and off the dance floor, you would go, yeah, this person's probably not stewing over this conversation the way that I am.
They probably don't remember it.
Yeah, probably forgot. So, okay, let's hop back just briefly to little Dean. So, Dean, think back to when you were around 8 or 9 years old. And I always love this question for people because it gets at kind of the heart of who we all are, I think. And actually, a lot of our work with PCM and something that has fascinated me still in that our structure of how we operate from a personality lens and some of our go-to energy, so to speak, for our personality, how we're motivated, how we resolve conflict, how we like to be led in workplace, how we like to connect with people, like you mentioned earlier, one-on-one. I also prefer that, or small groups. But thinking back to little Dean when you were 8 or 9, what are some key principles, right? We both love these factors of communication, but we know from our model that's formulated in most people by the age of 8, right? That's a set thing. It's scientifically proven. So by the age of 8 for little Dean, what is a key principle that you still live by now but that you can also trace back to little you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's really interesting archaeology to do, right? When you think
Yeah.
about those formative things, and many of them you don't remember, you don't recall where that software came from. But this might seem a little bit odd, but I do have this memory when I was, to your age point, probably 8 or 10 years old. I had nieces and nephews
Mhm.
um, when I was young because of the age discrepancy in our family. And
Yep.
so I was closer in age to my nieces and nephews than to my siblings. And I was probably 8 or 9, 10, somewhere in there. And they gave me a shirt. I don't know if it was for birthday or what it was for, but it was Snoopy. And if you remember some of those Snoopy shirts, it said Joe Boss, Joe Boss. And what resonated with me was I had a tendency when I was around my nieces and nephews to be a little bit bossy, right? Telling people what needs to be done. And
Were you like uncle cousin?
yeah, uncle cousin.
You
Yeah.
were uncle cousin.
And that, I think what sticks with me from that was the reflection that I don't have to be the one telling everybody what to do, even though
Mm,
that was my instinct and maybe even a distress pattern. And
okay.
so making sure, as I went into situations of leadership and working in team settings, recognizing the need to involve people, engage people, bring people into the process. And just because I know the answer doesn't mean it's the best one. Just because I know what needs to be done doesn't mean that other people shouldn't have a say in the plan. And so I think early on that began opening up my possibilities. Not that I'm always great at it, but opening up the importance and recognition that I don't have to be the boss. I don't have to tell people what to do,
Mm,
but rather bring people into that. And that, people are going to believe and engage in more of what they decide and say and conclude than what's been given, directed, or told to them. And so making sure that there is that type of relationship and involvement.
awesome, man. Well, hey, we all know if we see you start moonlighting or you do already play some musical instruments, your stage name has to be Joe Boss. Do you play any musical instruments?
I play the drums.
See? See, that's the perfect name for Joe Boss.
And because the drummer is ultimately in control of the song.
That's
Ultimately.
true. Well, I don't know. I don't want to debate you here on the air, but no. I wonder about the bass player though, actually.
Yeah, they're
I
even
think
more subtle.
I think bass players are like the most secret, in leadership circles, we call it informal authority. They're often people who are highly influential, but they might not even have the title to like I always think of my dad. My dad was a custodian at the school I grew up in. He definitely had Pablo had informal authority.
He knew everything that's going on.
Right. But yeah, so in a lot of leadership circles, that's called informal authority. But yeah, I think about that with bass players because they're often very silent. They often have a pretty specific demeanor and energy about them. But they're actually, to your point, drummers and bass players, yeah. Oof. That's deep, Dean.
I'd love to do like a
Joe. Joe
macro
Boss.
study of like musicians and psychological structure. You got your singers and your lead guitarist, your rhythm and guitar, your bass player, keyboards, drums. Like, what is it that's really attractive for those different roles in the band?
And do all lead singers have big promoter energies?
Right.
All right. Okay. We'll make sure you all, as always, that in the resources, you always want to click on the resources section of the show notes. We're going to link Dean's book, his the address to his website, and then also we will link some different, maybe some different things that have to do with. I think you have a calendar link. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you want to learn more.
And LinkedIn is, probably a good
Yep.
social media stopping off.
We'll make sure all of your stuff is linked. But on the same vein, there to kind of close us out, I want to ask you, I usually call this unapologetically living out my purpose. Is there anything you're specifically working on right now, or certain ways that you want people to connect with you, or like, hey, I have this happening, or
Mm.
I didn't mention Dean is also president of the Illinois chapter of National Speakers Association. Shout out to him because he is the one who I have found this organization through. So is there anything else outside of unapologetically promoting his role within that organization? Is there anything else you'd like to share that you're working on?
Yeah, not specific projects. We've got the book, we've got the
Yep.
Speaker Association, and if I take a moment just to think about the Speaker Association and encourage all of your listeners wherever they are, and that is, and I think it's fitting for what you talk about, and that is find a community. And so National Speaker Association and our Illinois chapter is more than anything a community of people with shared interests that are wanting to support each other. And it's a supportive, encouraging community. Many of us might be in situations or endeavors that can feel a little bit like lonely or solo in the work that you're
Yep.
doing. And
Definitely.
so having those communities of people where you can share how to solve challenges you're encountering or getting inspiration for new ways of doing things, that's my encouragement. And that's led me to actually here shortly I'm going to be going off to facilitate a 2-hour roundtable of leaders. And one of the things I found with that is there's a great desire and a hunger that people many didn't know they had. This hunger is to have those places, those spaces in what I call places to slow and grow, where we can come together, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us, to just step back from these, I'm holding up this phone here, what I call a weapon of mass distraction.
Oh,
And
oh yeah.
right, I mean, being
You
able to
held it
just
up so like, oh, this thing.
this thing, right? It's the new cigarettes, right? It used to be we occupied our free time with having a smoke, and now we check Twitter or whatever. And
You mean
so
X? You mean
X, excuse me, formerly
X?
known as Twitter. It's like Prince, right? Prince was formerly
Artist,
the artist,
formerly, yeah.
and so now we're in that mode. Um, but having those moments where we can either participate in or facilitate those places where we can slow and grow and have those meaningful conversations that never get forced onto our calendar. Everybody else's priorities are forcing their ways onto our calendar. And so let's find those spots where we can rejuvenate in connection and find that inspiration
Mhm.
and encouragement in those moments. So make that a priority.
Whew, that was good. That there's so many people I know looking for that right now. And I know I have only gone to one event and I've already connected with so many people just from one event.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. That's attributed to you. Final question to close this out. What is something you get asked all the time? So as
Mm-hmm.
a speaker, as a facilitator, a trainer, an author, what's something that you get asked all the time that you want to set the record straight? No, I'm kidding. But what is something that you get asked all the time that you're like, people might be surprised that in my line of work, being a communications expert and being a facilitator and speaker with large corporations, what's something that people might be surprised, like, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
You know, the um, the perpetual, I think, ask from the people that I work in, and I don't know if I have anything surprising in this, but it is maybe it's a moment of encouragement for people, whether they're in education, manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, you name it.
Mm.
Every whether it's a 10-person company or a 10,000 person company. I mean, I've got clients that are multi-billion dollars. I've got companies that are multi-thousand dollars. Um, everybody has the same issue,
Mm.
and it's relationships.
Including with
And
self, including with self.
yeah, and that's where it begins. And so I think um the most important work is being clear of who I am, where I am, where I end and the other begins, and being able to take ownership of our own emotions.
Yeah.
And if I could, if I could send a postcard to the world, it's like, your emotions are okay and they're yours. They aren't anybody else's, right? Nobody else is in charge of your emotions, and it's okay to ask for your needs to get met. It's okay to be angry and let people know in a healthy way, So yeah, the work that you're doing, the work that your listeners are doing, if we can orient it to helping people, deal with their own emotions in a healthy way, we're gonna have a better world.
Yeah. Bravo. I I should clap. That was so good.
And 20 years ago, I would have never even conceived of that, So this is part of my work too, right?
A
I'm
funny,
seeing and is emerging.
a funny thing happens when you start to put the mirror on yourself.
Mhm.
And you obviously, some might think, oh, well, that will lead you to scrutinize other people's behaviors even more. No, it makes you more able to be okay with exactly where you find yourself.
And if I can end with the paradox, a paradox of encouragement,
Uh-huh.
the more work you do on yourself, the less you think about yourself.
Yep.
And the more you can be in service to others.
Yep. Because you're not having all this junk of your own. And you
That's
can
right.
actually be present to focus. And listeners, we would love to hear from you in the comments what your takeaways are from Dean. We have been in conversation with the Dean Heffta, and I so appreciate your time, sir, and just your willingness to come on here with me as your hostess and get battered by my questions. So thank you, listeners. As always, we are so glad that you showed up for yourself today. Please hit subscribe, share this episode if you find value. I certainly have learned a lot from Dean, who not only do I consider a colleague and a friend professionally, but he's a person I look up to as a mentor and somebody I admire for his wisdom and his work in the world. So thank you for being here, Dean. And for all of us, let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care.